Liam Walker was the kind of man who moved through life without drawing much attention. He liked it that way. A retired Army veteran, Liam had spent his younger years on the front lines, where risk and duty defined his every action. But now his days were quieter. The once daily rituals of drills and high-stakes missions had been replaced by peaceful mornings and routines. On this particular day, he was just stopping by the bank to deposit a check. Liam didn't have much reason to worry about his finances. He lived modestly, never indulging in more than the essentials. The modest town in which he'd settled was a world away from the chaos he'd left behind. To the people here, he was simply Mr. Walker, an unassuming older man with a slight limp who kept to himself. Liam took his place in line, standing near the back. The bank was busy for a weekday afternoon. A few people stood ahead of him. A young woman with a baby cradled in her arms, an older couple whispering to each other, and a teenager distracted by his phone. The hum of low conversations and clicking keyboards filled the air, the mundane sounds of everyday life. He allowed himself to drift into thought, glancing out of the window at the busy street outside. That's when he noticed something odd. A black SUV pulled up abruptly outside the bank, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop. 4 men climbed out, each of them moving with a purpose that set off quiet alarms in Liam's mind. He'd seen this kind of coordinated movement before, the quick glances to assess their surroundings, the slight adjustments they made to their jackets, and the focused intensity in their eyes. His gut instinct screamed that something was wrong. A moment later, the doors of the bank swung open and the men stormed in, shouting, "Everyone on the ground! Hands where we can see them!" The lead man's voice boomed, cutting through the peaceful atmosphere like a knife. Panic spread instantly. Customers gasped, some screaming as they instinctively ducked, huddling low with their hands over their heads. A frightened teller dropped the stack of cash she was counting, scattering bills across the counter. Liam's mind went from 0 to combat mode in an instant, his senses sharpening, his muscles tensing. He dropped to his knees like the others, hands on his head, keeping his posture low. But his mind was already assessing the situation, processing every detail with the precision he'd honed over years of military service. The robbers were spread out across the lobby, each taking up a position. The leader, whom Liam mentally tagged as Alpha, had stationed himself by the entrance, a loaded pistol visible at his side. He was tall, wiry, with eyes that scanned the room like a hawk hunting prey. There was a gleam in his eyes, a dangerous mix of confidence and desperation. To Alpha's left stood a younger man with jittery hands and a nervous energy that suggested he was new to this. Liam marked him as Rookie. Rookie's gaze darted around the room, his grip on his gun so tight his knuckles were white. He looked like he was more afraid of the gun than anyone else in the room. Another man, burly and scowling, stationed himself near the vault door, barking orders at the terrified bank tellers. His posture was aggressive, and he seemed more interested in intimidation than anything else. Liam labeled him Muscle. The 4th man hung back near the windows. Unlike the others, he seemed calm, detached, observing everything without reacting. Liam didn't like this one. There was a cold calculation in his eyes that reminded him of men he'd met on the battlefield, men who viewed others as pawns. This one, he decided, would be the quiet one. As the robbers finished securing their positions, Alpha took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the hostages on the floor. "Listen up," he shouted, his voice cutting through the terrified murmurs. "We're not here to hurt anyone. Just do as we say, and you'll get out of here alive. But if anyone tries to be a hero—" He let the threat hang in the air, his eyes flashing dangerously. Liam's mind raced, but his face remained impassive. He'd seen situations like this go from bad to worse in an instant. Fear was a weapon these men would use to control the room, and he knew that panicking would only feed into their power. His training kicked in, and he forced himself to stay calm, slowing his breathing and keeping his mind focused. A quick glance around told him everything he needed to know about his fellow hostages. The young woman clutched her baby tightly, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously between the robbers. She seemed on the verge of tears. every muscle in her body tense as she instinctively tried to shield her child. The older couple next to her held hands, their faces drawn with fear. The elderly man whispered comforting words to his wife, but it was clear he was just as scared as she was. Liam shifted slightly, positioning himself near the young woman and the older couple, his gaze still fixed on the robbers. He knew that if things went south, he'd need to act fast. His body may not have had the same agility it did in his youth, but his instincts were as sharp as ever. "Open the vault!" Muscle barked at the bank manager, who was trembling as he fumbled for his keys. "Hurry up, or we start making examples." The manager, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and a nervous smile, swallowed hard and nodded, his hands shaking as he tried to unlock the vault door. The robbers kept their guns trained on the crowd, ensuring that no one made a move. But as the minutes passed, Liam noticed a shift in their demeanor. Muscle grew increasingly agitated, glancing toward the entrance and muttering under his breath. Rookie shifted his weight back and forth, his eyes darting nervously. Even the quiet one seemed less detached, his gaze now fixed on the bank's clock. They were running out of time. Liam's mind raced as he considered his options. There were 4 of them, each armed, each in control of a different part of the room. He couldn't take them down alone, but if he could buy time, distract them, create a diversion, he might be able to tip the scales in favor of the hostages. He took a slow, steady breath and looked up, catching the young mother's gaze. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, and he gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Stay calm," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'll make sure you and your baby are safe." The woman blinked, as if surprised by his calmness. She nodded, clutching her child a little closer, her breathing evening out slightly. Then Liam turned his attention to the elderly couple. "Stick close to me," he whispered to the man, his voice low and steady. "If anything happens, I'll guide you out." The man nodded, a spark of hope lighting in his eyes. He tightened his grip on his wife's hand, glancing at Liam with a silent, heartfelt gratitude. But just as Liam began to prepare his strategy, Alpha's gaze zeroed in on him. The leader's eyes narrowed as he took in Liam's calm, collected demeanor, his posture far too steady for an ordinary civilian. "You," Alpha said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You're too calm for my liking. Stand up." Liam slowly rose to his feet, his face blank, his eyes meeting Alpha's without fear. The other robbers watched, intrigued, as Alpha approached him, suspicion clouding his gaze. "What's your deal, old man?" Alpha asked, his voice laced with mockery. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" Liam held his gaze, his expression unreadable. "No," he replied, his voice calm. "Just a guy who wants everyone to make it out alive." Alpha sneered, clearly unimpressed. But Liam could see a flicker of uncertainty in the leader's eyes, a hesitation that told him he'd struck a nerve. Just as Alpha opened his mouth to respond, a faint sound echoed from outside the bank. A police siren, approaching quickly. Alpha tensed, his jaw tightening as he signaled to the others. "They're here," he hissed, his eyes flashing with anger. The robbers exchanged worried glances, their confidence faltering for the first time since they'd entered the bank. Liam saw his opportunity. He knew that if he could keep them off balance, if he could make them question their control over the situation, he might just create the opening he needed to save these people. And as the sirens grew louder, he steeled himself, ready to do whatever it took to protect the innocent lives around him. Liam knelt on the cold, hard floor, hands on his head surrounded by frightened faces. The robbers stalked through the bank, each one watching a different section of the room, their eyes alert and hands gripping their weapons. The panic of the hostages was palpable. He could feel the tension radiating from the people around him, their silent prayers for a miracle. Across from him, the young mother cradled her baby, rocking back and forth in a desperate attempt to keep the child calm. Her pale face and wide eyes told Liam she was barely holding it together. He knew that every little noise or movement from her child would draw the robbers' attention, and that wasn't something he could risk. To his left, the elderly couple leaned against each other for support. The husband's hand trembled slightly as he clutched his wife's, but his face held a look of steely determination. Liam respected that. They were both terrified, but they held each other with an unspoken promise to protect one another. Liam's military instincts flared as he scanned the robbers again, mentally cataloging their personalities and behaviors. They were tense, even jittery, but above all, they were inexperienced. He could see it in the way they constantly glanced at each other, seeking validation, needing assurance. Alpha, the leader, was pacing, his eyes flicking from the hostages to the bank vault and back again, trying to keep his crew focused and his plan intact. But the underlying anger in his gaze made it clear he wasn't as in control as he wanted to seem. Liam could sense the frustration mounting in him, and he knew that frustration often led to mistakes. Liam made a mental checklist. Alpha was clearly the ringleader and had a temper that could boil over under pressure. Muscle, the burly one, was all about intimidation, barking orders at anyone who even looked up. Rookie, the fidgety young man, seemed out of place, his face filled with dread. The last man, the quiet one, worried Liam the most. He was too calm, too measured. This one wouldn't be easy to manipulate. As Liam quietly observed each robber, Alpha's gaze landed on him again, narrowing with suspicion. He took a step closer, his gun hanging loosely at his side, his jaw set in irritation. "Hey!" Alpha's voice cut through the silence. He pointed the gun directly at Liam. "What's your problem, old man? You got a death wish or something?" Liam kept his face neutral, not breaking eye contact. He'd faced worse threats in his time. "Just doing what you said," he replied, his voice calm and level. "Staying down, keeping quiet." Alpha's eyes narrowed, trying to gauge Liam's response. For a second, Liam thought he might let it go, but then Alpha's mouth twisted into a sneer. "Well, keep it that way," he growled, taking a step back. Liam gave him a slight nod, lowering his gaze. The small interaction had drawn the attention of the other hostages, though, who looked at Liam with a mix of admiration and fear. He could see the silent question in their eyes. Why is he so calm? Does he know something we don't? The young mother, her baby nestled tightly in her arms, met his gaze with a faint glimmer of hope. He could tell she wanted to believe that he could protect them, that he might have a plan. Liam gave her a barely perceptible nod, as if to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." As Alpha returned to his pacing, he barked orders to the bank manager, who was visibly shaking as he fumbled for the vault keys. "Hurry it up," Alpha snapped. "I don't have all day." Muscle positioned himself near the hostages, his heavy boots echoing ominously on the marble floor. "Anyone tries anything funny, and I'll make sure it's the last thing you do," he warned, pointing his gun toward the crowd. His gaze landed on the teenager who had been on his phone earlier, the boy's face now as white as a sheet. Muscle smirked, clearly enjoying the fear he was instilling. Meanwhile, Rookie kept looking over his shoulder toward the door, flinching at the slightest sound. Liam noted his unease, realizing that Rookie's nerves might be the weak link he could exploit. "Alpha," Rookie muttered, his voice shaky. What if this takes too long? What if the cops get here before we're done?" Alpha shot him a glare. "Stop worrying about it. Just focus on doing your job. We're going to get in, get the cash, and get out. Got it?" Rookie nodded, though he still looked unconvinced. Liam could tell the kid was out of his depth, and he wondered how he'd ended up in this situation. Maybe I can work with that, Liam thought. If he could push Rookie further, he might unravel enough to create an opportunity. As the minutes dragged on, Liam sensed the rising anxiety among the hostages. The young mother struggled to keep her baby quiet, her hands trembling as she rocked the child gently. Liam shifted slightly, leaning toward her. "Stay calm," he whispered softly, barely moving his lips. "Keep your breathing steady. Focus on your child. You're doing great." The woman looked at him, startled by his calm tone, but she nodded, taking a deep breath and steadying herself. The baby stirred, but her soothing touch seemed to work, and the child quieted down. To his left, the elderly man leaned closer, his hand still gripping his wife's. You seem to know what you're doing," he whispered, his voice filled with a mix of fear and hope. Liam nodded subtly. "I've been in tight spots before. Just stay calm and follow my lead." The older man nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you. I don't know what we'd do without you here." Liam's heart ached slightly at the gratitude in the man's voice, but he forced himself to stay focused. Now wasn't the time for reflection. Every second counted, and he needed to be ready. Liam shifted his focus back to the robbers, paying close attention to each one's routine and position. Alpha was growing more agitated by the minute, snapping at his team and pacing near the front doors. Muscle kept scanning the room, his gaze predatory, but he was more focused on looking intimidating than actually keeping watch. Rookie's hands trembled each time he checked his weapon, and Liam could tell that fear was eating away at him, and the quiet one. He was simply watching, his eyes cold and calculating, as though he were waiting for an excuse to escalate the situation. Liam's mind raced. He couldn't take them down alone, not with his limited mobility and the threat to the hostages. But if he could distract them, draw their attention elsewhere long enough to get some people out, then maybe, just maybe, they'd have a fighting chance. He made eye contact with the young mother again. "If anything happens," he whispered, "stay low. Keep your child close and get to the far wall. Understand?" She nodded, a look of determination filling her eyes. She was ready. Liam repeated similar instructions to the elderly couple, their nods of understanding giving him a sense of purpose. If he could keep them calm and prepared, they might just be able to survive this. But then, just as he began to finalize his plan, the quiet one spoke, his voice breaking the silence with a cold authority that made Liam's skin prickle. "Alpha," he said, glancing toward the clock. "We need to pick up the pace. We're running out of time." Alpha tensed, his eyes narrowing. He turned back to the bank manager, practically growling. "Open that vault, now!" Liam could sense the desperation creeping into the robber's actions, and he knew that desperate people were unpredictable. He had to be ready. As Alpha moved closer to the vault, a faint sound reached their ears. A police siren, faint but growing louder. Alpha's head snapped up, his face twisting with rage. "Everyone down!" he shouted, his voice filled with panic as he looked around, trying to assess the situation. The other robbers tensed, and Rookie's face went pale, his fear evident. Liam's pulse quickened. The police were closing in, and that meant time was running out for everyone. He knew that whatever move he made next could mean the difference between life and death. And as the sirens drew closer, Liam steeled himself, ready to put his plan into action. The faint sound of approaching sirens echoed outside, amplifying the tension in the bank. The robbers' expressions shifted from smug control to anxious desperation, their eyes darting toward the doors. Liam could sense their rising panic, and he knew that if they felt cornered, they might become even more dangerous. As Alpha barked orders at his team, Liam's mind drifted back to a different place, a different mission. He hadn't thought about those days in a long time, but the memory surfaced unbidden, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. It was a hot, unforgiving desert afternoon, and Liam was leading his squad on an extraction mission deep in enemy territory. Their objective had been straightforward: get in, secure the civilians, and get out. But when they arrived, everything had gone wrong. A convoy of enemy vehicles had cornered them, cutting off their escape route. The tension had been brutal, every decision weighing on Liam's shoulders. As the team huddled in the sparse cover of a rocky outcropping, he knew he was their only hope. He'd mapped out a daring plan, one that could work if everyone executed it flawlessly. His team had trusted him completely, following his orders without hesitation. But in war, even the best plans don't always work. In a heartbeat, the sound of gunfire filled the air, an ambush they hadn't foreseen. Liam had fought desperately, his every instinct focused on getting his team to safety. But despite his efforts, 2 of his men hadn't made it. They were young, both just starting their careers, their whole lives ahead of them. That mission had changed Liam, leaving him with scars both visible and invisible. He'd done everything he could, but the weight of their loss stayed with him. It was a burden he'd carried ever since, one that had driven him into a quiet life, away from duty and responsibility. But now, staring down at the terrified hostages around him, Liam felt a familiar sense of duty reigniting within him. These people, these strangers, were now under his protection. He couldn't afford to fail them. Liam blinked, shaking off the memory, and refocused on the situation at hand. His heart beat with a steady resolve, his mind returning to the calm clarity he'd honed over years of service. He glanced around the room, taking in every detail, analyzing every threat. The young mother caught his eye, her face pale but resolute as she clutched her baby close. The elderly couple next to her held each other's hands, visibly trembling but watching Liam with a glimmer of hope. He couldn't let them down. He wouldn't. Just then, Alpha's voice cut through the tense silence. "Rookie!" he snapped, his voice harsh and unforgiving. "Keep an eye on the back exit. Make sure no one slips out." Rookie nodded, though his face was pale and his hands shook as he adjusted his grip on his gun. Liam noticed the fear in his eyes, the uncertainty that hinted at a lack of experience. He's scared, Liam thought, filing away this observation. Scared people make mistakes. Alpha turned back to the bank manager, who was still fumbling with the vault keys, his hands trembling. "Hurry up, or we'll start picking targets," he threatened, the cold edge in his voice silencing any protests from the manager. As Alpha focused on the vault, Liam looked over at Rookie, who was shifting nervously by the back door. The young man's gaze kept darting toward the entrance as if he was hoping the whole ordeal would end soon. Maybe, Liam thought. He isn't here by choice. He caught Rookie's eye and held his gaze. For a moment, Rookie looked away, then glanced back, clearly unnerved by Liam's steady, calm expression. Liam gave him a slight nod, as if to say, "It doesn't have to be this way." Liam turned his attention back to the hostages, giving them a reassuring look. He knew that keeping them calm was crucial. Panic could make things spiral out of control in an instant. He leaned toward the elderly man next to him, his voice a quiet murmur. "When I give the signal, move to the side wall. Stay low, stay close to each other." The older man nodded, his grip tightening on his wife's hand. He met Liam's gaze, his eyes filled with both fear and determination. "We trust you," he whispered, his voice shaky but sincere. Liam offered a faint smile. "We're going to get through this," he said, his tone steady and sure. "Just be ready." He then turned his attention to the young mother, who was rocking her baby, her gaze filled with quiet terror. "When you have the chance, head toward that door," he instructed, nodding toward a side exit. "Stay low and keep your baby close. I'll cover you." She looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, and nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line of determination. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Liam nodded, his own heart tightening with the weight of responsibility. These people were counting on him. He had one shot, and he couldn't afford to fail them. Alpha continued pacing, his frustration evident. He kept glancing toward the door as if expecting the police to storm in at any moment. Liam could see that Alpha's nerves were wearing thin, his grip on control slipping. Meanwhile, Muscle stood guard by the hostages, his gaze scanning the room, looking for any sign of defiance. But Rookie was a different story. He was practically shaking, his gaze unfocused, his stance unsteady. Liam saw an opportunity. If he could push Rookie to the edge, he might be able to create a distraction. Liam waited until Rookie glanced his way again, then gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Rookie's eyes widened, and he looked away quickly, but not before Liam saw the conflict in his gaze. Just as Liam was about to speak again, the quiet one stepped forward, his gaze sharp and calculating as he observed the room. His presence was unsettling, his silence carrying a weight that made even Alpha seem uneasy. "We don't have time for mistakes," the quiet one said, his voice low but firm. He looked directly at Alpha, his expression cold. "If the cops get in, we're done. Finish what we came for or this will end badly." The words were calm, but the implication was clear. He was losing patience, and he wouldn't hesitate to turn on anyone who compromised their mission. Alpha nodded, his expression hardening. He turned to the bank manager, who was finally opening the vault door, his hands shaking as he unlocked the massive steel door. The robbers' attention was now focused on the vault, their eyes gleaming with greed. Liam knew this was his chance. They were distracted, and he had the trust of the hostages. If he could time it right, he could create a diversion, draw the robbers' focus away from the exits, and get as many people to safety as possible. As he prepared to put his plan into motion, Liam's mind flashed to the young men he'd lost on that mission years ago. The guilt he carried had kept him from stepping into any situation like this for so long. But now, surrounded by innocent people depending on him, he felt that old sense of duty and responsibility rise within him once more. He could almost hear the voices of his fallen comrades, reminding him of his vow to protect others, no matter the cost. "This time," he murmured under his breath, his resolve hardening, "no one gets left behind." Just as he prepared to give the signal to the hostages, a loud knock echoed from the bank's main entrance, jolting everyone to attention. It was the police, and their voices came through a megaphone, echoing into the lobby. "Inside the bank! We know you're in there. This is your final warning. Stand down and come out with your hands up." Alpha froze, his face going pale as he glanced at his crew. "Everyone, stay calm," he hissed, though his own voice shook slightly. He looked over at the quiet one, who gave him a nod, their eyes meeting in silent agreement. Liam could feel the robbers' control slipping, their confidence fading. This was his moment, his chance to turn the tide. He glanced at the young mother, the elderly couple, and the others he'd spoken to, giving them a firm nod. He was ready. It was time to act. As the police continued to shout warnings through the megaphone, tension surged in the bank. Liam could see the cracks forming in the robbers' composure, their confidence now fractured by the looming threat outside. Rookie, the jittery young man, was practically trembling, his eyes darting around as though looking for an escape. Muscle gripped his gun more tightly, his face twisted in anger, while Alpha's jaw clenched as he tried to maintain control. "Stay calm, everyone," Alpha shouted, his tone an uneasy mix of command and desperation. His gaze turned to the hostages, daring any one of them to make a move. He leveled his weapon, a cold glint in his eyes, and barked, "Anyone tries anything, and I promise you'll regret it." Liam took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself. He'd dealt with this kind of desperation before, and he knew one thing for certain. When people like Alpha felt cornered, they became unpredictable. But he also knew that was something he could use to his advantage. Liam subtly shifted his position, drawing Rookie's attention. He let his gaze linger on the young man just long enough to convey a sense of understanding, a look that communicated both empathy and an unspoken question. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Rookie's face paled, his mouth opening as if he wanted to say something, but he quickly shut it, casting a nervous glance at Alpha. His hands continued to shake, his grip on the gun uncertain. Liam could see the inner conflict on his face. The kid wasn't a hardened criminal. He was scared, and that fear could be the key to unraveling him. "Hey, kid," Liam said in a low voice, just loud enough for Rookie to hear. "This doesn't have to be your story." Rookie's eyes widened slightly, confusion and fear flashing in them. But before he could respond, Alpha shot him a sharp glare. "What's your problem, Rookie?" Alpha's voice dripped with disdain. "You're supposed to be watching the hostages, not making friends." Rookie swallowed hard, his gaze falling to the floor. Liam could see the shame and doubt eating away at him, and he knew he was close to breaking. If he could push just a little harder, Rookie might falter, and that could be the distraction he needed. Meanwhile, the other hostages watched the standoff with wide eyes, their fear intensifying with every second that ticked by. The elderly couple held each other close, their expressions a mixture of terror and hope as they looked at Liam. The young mother rocked her baby, biting her lip to keep her own fear in check as she glanced nervously between Liam and the robbers. Liam gave her a small, reassuring nod, signaling that he hadn't forgotten his promise. She nodded back, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. She trusted him, and that trust bolstered his resolve. Suddenly, Alpha's voice cut through the tense silence. "Enough of this waiting," he growled, his patience clearly wearing thin. He turned to Muscle and gestured toward the vault. "Get in there and load up the cash. We're not leaving empty-handed." Muscle nodded, moving toward the vault with an eager grin. But Liam could see the flicker of doubt in Alpha's eyes as he glanced toward the doors, where the police were still waiting. He was scared, and that fear was starting to seep into the rest of the crew. Taking advantage of the distraction, Liam subtly shifted his position, moving closer to Rookie. He knew he couldn't act openly, but if he could just get close enough, he might be able to disarm the young man without drawing the attention of the others. As Muscle and Alpha focused on the vault, Liam leaned toward Rookie, keeping his voice low. "You don't have to do this," he whispered, his tone calm but firm. "Just put the gun down. It's not worth it." Rookie's hands shook even more, his grip loosening on the weapon. His eyes flicked to the hostages, and for a moment, Liam saw a glimmer of regret in his gaze. But then, the quiet one's voice cut through the air, cold and unfeeling. "Don't listen to him, Rookie," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "This isn't a charity mission. Get a grip, or you're out." Rookie flinched, his face pale as he nodded, his hands tightening around the gun again. But Liam saw the doubt that lingered in his eyes, the hesitation that hadn't fully gone away. "He's close," Liam thought. One more push, and he might snap. Liam knew he needed a bigger distraction, something that would pull the robber's attention away long enough for him to make his move. His gaze drifted to a nearby stack of papers on the floor, likely dropped by a frightened teller when the robbers stormed in. An idea sparked in his mind. He shifted his weight subtly, reaching his foot out to nudge one of the papers across the floor, creating a faint, shuffling noise. The sound was barely noticeable, but in the silence of the room, it drew the robber's attention for just a split second. Alpha whipped his head around, his eyes scanning the room, irritation flaring in his gaze. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice harsh. Taking advantage of the distraction, Liam moved closer to Rookie, his voice calm and steady. "This isn't your fight, kid," he murmured. "Walk away while you still can." Rookie's breathing quickened, his gaze darting between Liam and Alpha. For a moment he looked as if he might actually listen, his grip loosening on the gun. But then Alpha's gaze settled on them, suspicion darkening his face. "What are you two whispering about over there?" he snarled, stepping closer, his hand tightening on his weapon. Liam straightened, meeting Alpha's gaze without a hint of fear. "Nothing," he replied evenly, "just trying to keep the kid calm." Alpha's eyes narrowed, his irritation deepening. But before he could respond, the sound of a police siren grew louder outside, and the robber's attention shifted back to the windows. Alpha's face twisted in frustration, his control over the situation slipping further with every second. As the robber's attention remained focused on the police outside, Liam seized the moment. In one swift motion, he reached out and grabbed Rookie's wrist, twisting it just enough to disarm him without causing a scene. The gun slipped from Rookie's hand and fell to the floor, landing with a soft thud that went unnoticed amid the tension in the room. Rookie's eyes widened in shock, but Liam held his gaze, silently urging him to stay quiet. The young man swallowed hard, nodding slightly as though he understood that Liam was giving him a chance to get out of this. Liam quickly pocketed the weapon, keeping his expression neutral as he turned his attention back to Alpha. The leader's frustration was reaching a boiling point, his gaze flickering between the hostages and the windows as he tried to maintain control. "We need to get out of here," Alpha muttered, his voice filled with barely contained panic. "This wasn't supposed to go like this." The young mother watched Liam with wide eyes, her expression a mixture of awe and relief. She gave him a grateful look, her body relaxing slightly as she realized that he was doing everything he could to protect them. The elderly couple, too, exchanged glances, a spark of hope rekindling in their eyes. They knew that Liam was different, that he was someone who wouldn't leave them to fend for themselves. As Alpha continued to argue with his crew, Liam glanced around the room, silently signaling to the hostages. He knew he couldn't speak openly, but his steady gaze conveyed a message. Stay calm. Be ready. Just as Liam prepared to put his plan into full motion, the quiet one turned, his gaze landing squarely on Liam. A slight smirk played at the corner of his mouth, as though he'd seen through Liam's intentions all along. "Well, well," the quiet one said, his voice smooth and mocking. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero." Liam met his gaze without a hint of fear, his stance unyielding. The tension between them was thick, a silent standoff that promised more danger to come. The robbers hadn't noticed yet that Rookie was unarmed, but the quiet one's words had cast a suspicious shadow over the room. Liam knew he had to act fast, or the delicate balance he'd created would crumble, and the lives of the hostages would be at greater risk than ever. Liam could feel the eyes of every hostage on him, their hope and fear mingling as they waited for him to make a move. He'd managed to disarm Rookie without raising an alarm, but now the quiet one's sharp gaze was fixed on him, his smirk suggesting he'd already pieced together that Liam was more than an ordinary bystander. The quiet one stepped closer, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a dangerous glint. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, but laced with a chilling edge. Liam met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, his voice calm and steady. The quiet one tilted his head, studying him like a puzzle he intended to solve. "I've seen men like you before," he said, his tone low and taunting. "You think you're the hero. You think you can save everyone." Liam held his gaze, saying nothing, letting the silence speak for itself. He knew that engaging too much would only give the quiet one more ammunition, and right now he couldn't afford to draw any more attention. After a moment, the quiet one's smirk faded, and he straightened, his expression hardening. "Watch yourself, old man," he muttered, stepping back and moving toward Alpha. But his warning hung in the air, a clear threat that Liam couldn't ignore. As the quiet one walked away, Liam exhaled softly, his mind racing. He looked over at the young mother who was still cradling her baby, her eyes locked on him with a newfound trust and determination. She gave him a small nod, as if to say she was ready for whatever came next. The elderly man beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around his wife, caught Liam's eye and offered a faint, shaky smile. "Thank you," he mouthed, his voice trembling with gratitude. The elderly couple, like the young mother, trusted him completely, and he could feel the weight of their hopes pressing down on him. But he also felt the resolve hardening in his chest. These people were depending on him, and he couldn't let them down. Alpha returned to the center of the room, his frustration now palpable. The noise outside had grown louder, the police's presence unmistakable, and he was visibly torn between maintaining control and cutting his losses. "Listen up!" he shouted, his voice carrying through the bank. "We're running out of time, so unless you want to make things worse for yourselves, you're all going to cooperate." The hostages flinched at his outburst, fear rippling through the room. But Liam remained calm, his eyes focused, his expression steady. He could see the panic in Alpha's gaze, the mounting pressure that was pushing him closer to the edge. He knew that Alpha's desperation would eventually lead to mistakes, and he was counting on it. As Alpha continued shouting commands, Liam shifted, positioning himself slightly between the hostages and the robbers. He'd kept a low profile up to this point, but he knew that the time had come to take a bolder stance. His gaze met Rookie's again, and he gave the young man a small nod, silently urging him to take a step back. Rookie hesitated, his face pale, but Liam's steady expression seemed to give him a glimmer of courage. He took a small step back, lowering his hand slightly, as though he was considering Liam's unspoken offer to step away from the chaos. "Hey!" Alpha barked, his gaze snapping toward Rookie. "What are you doing?" Rookie froze, his face paling even more, but Liam stepped forward, drawing Alpha's attention away. "Leave him alone," Liam said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Alpha's eyes widened slightly, surprise flashing across his face. He hadn't expected defiance, especially from an older man. His surprise quickly morphed into anger, and he took a threatening step forward. "You got a death wish, old man," he snarled, leveling his gun at Liam's chest. Liam held his ground, his expression unchanging. "I don't think you want to go down this road," he replied, his tone steady. "If you hurt anyone here, it'll make things worse for you." The police won't let you walk out of here alive." Alpha hesitated, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Liam's words had struck a nerve, and he knew he had to press the advantage before Alpha regained his composure. "You're in a losing situation," Liam continued, his voice firm. "But if you let these people go, you might have a chance to end this peacefully." As Liam spoke, Rookie looked at him with a mixture of confusion and hesitation, clearly torn between his fear of Alpha and his own misgivings about the situation. Liam held his gaze, giving him an encouraging nod. "Think about it, kid," he said quietly. "This isn't your fight. Walk away now, and you can leave this behind." Rookie swallowed hard, his hand loosening on his weapon as he looked down at the floor. The internal conflict was evident on his face, his desire to leave clashing with his fear of the consequences. But Alpha was quick to pick up on Rookie's hesitation, and his face twisted with rage. "You're not thinking of bailing, are you?" he sneered, stepping closer to Rookie with a menacing expression. Rookie's face went pale, his gaze darting to Liam for reassurance. But before Alpha could escalate the situation, the Quiet One stepped in, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Enough," he said, his tone icy. "This is getting us nowhere. We need to stick to the plan." Alpha glared at him but seemed to grudgingly accept his authority, stepping back with a scowl. But his frustration was still palpable, and Liam knew it wouldn't take much to push him over the edge. With the robbers momentarily distracted, Liam took the opportunity to signal the hostages, his expression conveying a sense of calm and determination. He looked over at the young mother and the elderly couple, silently reassuring them that he hadn't abandoned his plan. The young mother clutched her baby close, her face showing a mixture of fear and resolve as she gave him a small, grateful nod. The elderly couple exchanged a look of relief, their eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. They knew that Liam was watching over them, and that knowledge seemed to strengthen their spirits. But Liam's calm demeanor had also drawn the attention of some of the other hostages, who looked to him with growing trust. A few people nodded in silent acknowledgement, their expressions determined. They understood that Liam was more than just a bystander, that he was someone they could rely on. As Alpha and the Quiet One argued, the sound of the police megaphone broke through again, their words echoing through the bank lobby. "This is your last warning. Release the hostages and come out with your hands up." Alpha's face twisted with anger, his gaze darting toward the windows, then back to the hostages. He looked unsteady, his confidence clearly shaken, and Liam knew that he was close to losing control. Liam saw the opening and took a deep breath, bracing himself. He turned to face the robbers, his gaze steady. "It's over," he said firmly. "The police aren't going to give you what you want. But if you let these people go, you might still walk out of here." The Quiet One sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" Liam met his gaze without flinching. "I think you have no other choice," he replied, his voice calm. "You're surrounded, outnumbered, and outmatched. There's only one way this ends, without bloodshed." Just as Liam finished speaking, Alpha's face twisted in rage, and he took a menacing step forward, his gun raised. But before he could react, the police megaphone blared once more, and a tactical team's shadows appeared outside the glass doors, poised to breach. Liam felt the tension thicken, his every sense heightened as he prepared for what was to come. He knew that the next few seconds would be critical, and that any wrong move could endanger them all. He glanced back at the young mother, the elderly couple, and the other hostages, his gaze filled with a silent promise. He was ready to protect them, no matter the cost. The tense silence in the bank was punctuated by the echo of the police's final warning outside. The robbers looked increasingly unsettled, their eyes darting toward the entrance, where they could see the shadows of tactical officers preparing to breach. Alpha's expression twisted with a mixture of rage and fear. He was losing control of the situation, and the realization was visible in the tightness of his grip on the gun. Liam saw the desperation in Alpha's eyes, and he knew that desperation often led to reckless choices. Liam kept his gaze steady, his posture calm. He needed to be the anchor in the room, the calm presence that reassured the hostages. But he also knew that his own plan was reaching a critical point. One wrong move, one slip-up, could lead to tragedy. "Listen to me, all of you," Alpha shouted, his voice laced with frustration. "We're not going anywhere without what we came for, so don't think you can just wait us out." The hostages flinched at his tone, shrinking back, their expressions filled with terror. Liam, however, held his ground, watching Alpha's every move with a calm intensity. Alpha's gaze flicked to Liam, his eyes narrowing. "And you," he spat, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" Liam met Alpha's gaze without flinching. "I think you're out of options," he replied evenly, his voice calm but unyielding. "The police aren't going to let you walk out of here with hostages. You know that." Alpha sneered, stepping closer, his gun aimed squarely at Liam's chest. "You're really starting to get on my nerves, old man," he growled. "Maybe I should make an example out of you." Liam remained still, his gaze steady. "If you hurt anyone, it'll only make things worse for you. You're already trapped." The quiet one, who had been watching silently, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He placed a hand on Alpha's shoulder, his voice cold and calm. "He's right. We don't need to draw any more attention." Alpha hesitated, visibly torn between anger and reason. He took a deep breath, lowering his gun slightly, but his gaze remained hostile. "We finish what we came for," he muttered, his tone tense. "And then we get out." Rookie, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, looked visibly shaken. Liam could see the fear in his expression, the doubt that lingered just beneath the surface. He decided to press that advantage. Liam looked at Rookie, catching his eye. "Kid," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "this isn't what you signed up for. You don't have to be part of this." Rookie's face paled, his gaze darting between Liam and the robbers. He looked as if he wanted to speak, but fear kept him silent. Alpha noticed Rookie's hesitation and snapped, "You're not backing out on me now, are you?" Rookie swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he struggled to keep his composure. No, I'm not," he stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. The quiet one shot Rookie a warning glance, his eyes narrowing. "Stay focused," he said coldly, his tone a thinly veiled threat. But Liam saw the conflict on Rookie's face and he knew he was close to breaking. If he could push just a little harder, Rookie might choose to help the hostages instead of the robbers. As the robbers argued among themselves, Liam shifted his attention to the hostages, subtly signaling to the young mother and the elderly couple. He knew that if they could position themselves near the side exit, they'd have a better chance of escaping when the moment came. The young mother caught his eye, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. She held her baby close, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. The elderly man, clutching his wife's hand, gave Liam a small, grateful nod, understanding the silent message. Liam's mind raced. He needed to create a bigger distraction, something that would force the robbers to focus on him rather than the hostages. But he also knew that any overt action could put everyone at risk. He had to be smart, calculated. Just as Liam was about to make his move, the quiet one stepped forward, his cold gaze fixed on him. There was a knowing look in his eyes, as though he saw through every one of Liam's intentions. "Well," the quiet one murmured, his voice soft but menacing, "it seems we've got ourselves a hero here. You must really want to play the savior, don't you?" Liam didn't reply, keeping his expression neutral. He knew that the quiet one was testing him, probing for a reaction, but he wasn't about to give him one. The quiet one smirked, taking another step closer. "Let's see how brave you are when the stakes are raised," he said, his tone taunting. Before anyone could react, he grabbed the young mother by the arm, pulling her forward. She gasped, clutching her baby protectively as she stumbled, her face filled with terror. Liam's heart raced, his instincts screaming at him to act. But he forced himself to stay calm, knowing that any sudden move could endanger her further. "Let her go," he said, his voice low but commanding. The quiet one's smirk widened, his gaze taunting. "Or what? What are you going to do, hero?" Liam held his gaze, his expression hardening. "You know this isn't going to end well for you," he replied calmly. "The police are right outside. You're surrounded. If you hurt her, there's no going back." For a moment, the quiet one hesitated, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. But then he tightened his grip, his face twisting into a sneer. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Liam knew he had to act before the situation escalated further. He took a slow step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, his voice calm and steady. "Let's not make this worse than it already is," he said, his tone even. "You can still end this without hurting anyone else." The quiet one sneered, but Liam could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. He was starting to falter, his confidence shaken by the mounting pressure. Liam continued speaking, his voice firm. "This isn't what you want. Hurting innocent people isn't going to get you what you came for." The quiet one's grip on the young mother loosened slightly, his expression conflicted. Liam saw his opportunity and took a step closer, maintaining eye contact. "Let her go," he repeated, his tone unwavering. "It's over." The quiet one's face twisted with frustration, but after a tense moment he released the young mother, pushing her back toward the hostages. She stumbled, clutching her baby, her eyes wide with relief as she looked at Liam. The room fell into an eerie silence as the quiet one stepped back, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Liam could feel the tension mounting, the delicate balance of control slipping further with every second that passed. Just as he prepared to guide the hostages to safety, a shadow moved outside the glass doors, and the police tactical team's footsteps grew louder. The robbers' attention snapped to the doors, their faces filled with a mix of fear and desperation. Liam knew that the final showdown was approaching, and he steeled himself, his focus unbreakable. The lives of the hostages depended on what he did next, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect them. The police tactical team was ready to breach, their footsteps echoing through the silence outside the glass doors. The robbers, now visibly panicked, shifted their weapons and exchanged uneasy glances. Alpha's hands tightened around his gun, his jaw clenched, his gaze darting between the entrance and the hostages. Liam saw the fear in Alpha's eyes, the telltale sign that he was close to losing his nerve. This was the moment Liam had been waiting for. The robbers were unbalanced, rattled by the police presence outside and the growing restlessness of the hostages. He knew he had to act now if he wanted to save everyone. Liam shifted slightly, positioning himself between the robbers and the hostages. He glanced around, catching the eyes of the young mother, the elderly couple, and several others who had been watching him with hope. His expression was steady, conveying a clear, silent message. "Get ready." Just as Alpha turned to bark a final command at his crew, Liam made his move. With a swift, calculated motion, he knocked over a nearby stack of cash-filled binders, scattering them across the floor with a loud crash. The noise echoed through the lobby, grabbing the attention of everyone in the room. The robbers whirled around, their weapons raised, their faces twisted in shock and anger. But that brief moment of distraction was all Liam needed. In one fluid motion, Liam lunged forward, grabbing Alpha's wrist and twisting it sharply, forcing him to drop his weapon. Alpha let out a strangled yell of pain as the gun clattered to the floor, sliding out of reach. Liam wasted no time, using his weight to push Alpha back, pinning him against the wall with unyielding strength. The other robbers, caught off guard, scrambled to react. Muscle, the burly man who had been guarding the vault, raised his gun, his eyes filled with rage. But just as he aimed, one of the hostages, a young man Liam hadn't noticed before, leaped forward, grabbing Muscle's arm and knocking him off balance. Muscle stumbled, momentarily thrown off, and Liam seized the opportunity. He kicked the gun across the floor, sending it skidding out of reach, then pivoted to face the next threat. The young mother, clutching her baby, took advantage of the chaos, moving swiftly toward the side exit as Liam had instructed. The elderly couple, now filled with a renewed sense of courage, followed close behind, guiding a few other hostages toward the door. Liam's calm, confident presence had given them the strength to act, and now they were making their escape. But Rookie, the young robber who had been visibly hesitant from the start, was frozen in place, his gun hanging loosely by his side as he watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. Liam locked eyes with him, silently urging him to drop his weapon and stand down. Rookie hesitated, his face pale, his gaze filled with a mixture of fear and regret. After a moment's pause, he let the gun slip from his fingers, raising his hands in surrender. Liam gave him a slight nod, acknowledging his choice to step away from the violence. But as Liam turned, he found himself face to face with the Quiet One, the last of the robbers still armed and still determined to fight. His expression was cold, his gaze unwavering as he leveled his gun at Liam, a smirk twisting at the corner of his mouth. "Well," the Quiet One sneered, his voice calm and mocking, "looks like you're out of moves, hero." Liam held his ground, his gaze steely. "This is your last chance to walk away," he replied, his tone low but firm. "Put the gun down, and this can end without anyone else getting hurt." The Quiet One let out a bitter laugh, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I don't think so." Liam's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. He watched the Quiet One's movements closely, noting the subtle shifts in his posture, the tension in his arm. He'd seen this kind of recklessness before. He knew the Quiet One was more dangerous than the others, driven by a cold, calculated ruthlessness. In a split second, Liam made his move. With a swift motion, Liam dropped to the floor, using the scattered binders as cover as he rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the shot. The Quiet One fired. The gunshot rang out, echoing through the bank, but the bullet missed its mark, embedding itself in the wall behind Liam. Taking advantage of the Quiet One's momentary surprise, Liam sprang to his feet, grabbing a nearby chair and throwing it at him with surprising force. The Quiet One stumbled back, momentarily thrown off balance as he struggled to regain his footing. But Liam didn't give him the chance. He closed the distance in a few quick strides, knocking the gun from the Quiet One's hand and twisting his arm behind his back in a swift, decisive maneuver. The Quiet One struggled, his face contorted with rage, but Liam's grip was unyielding. "It's over," he said firmly, his voice filled with finality. As the Quiet One's resistance faded, Liam restrained him, securing him with a firm grip until the police tactical team stormed into the bank, their weapons raised as they took control of the scene. The tactical team quickly moved in, securing the robbers and ensuring the hostages were safe. One by one, the police escorted the hostages out, guiding them to safety. The young mother was the first to reach the exit, clutching her baby tightly, her face filled with relief as she glanced back at Liam with a grateful smile. The elderly couple followed close behind, the man giving Liam a nod of deep appreciation. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us all." Liam nodded in return, his heart swelling with relief and gratitude. The hostages' safety was all he had cared about, and seeing them escape unharmed filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As the last of the hostages filed out, a young police officer approached Liam, his expression one of respect and admiration. "Sir," he said, extending a hand, "we couldn't have done this without you. You kept them safe." Liam accepted the handshake, nodding quietly. "Just did what needed to be done," he replied, his voice humble. The officer studied him, sensing the weight of experience behind his calm demeanor. "I don't know who you are, but thank you." Liam gave him a faint smile, saying nothing more. He didn't need recognition. He only needed the assurance that the hostages were safe. He glanced back at the now empty lobby, a sense of peace settling over him as he realized that he'd finally been able to fulfill the promise he'd made to himself all those years ago, to protect others, no matter the cost. As Liam quietly left the scene, blending into the dispersing crowd, the young mother called out to him from across the street. She approached, her expression filled with gratitude and curiosity. "Can I know your name?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. Liam hesitated, considering whether to reveal anything about himself. After a moment, he offered her a quiet smile and replied, "Liam Walker." The young mother smiled, her eyes brimming with gratitude as she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Walker." As she turned back toward her family, Liam slipped away into the night, content to leave behind only the memory of a quiet hero who had emerged when he was needed most. The late afternoon sun cast a soft glow over the bank as the last of the hostages were escorted outside, each one visibly shaken but safe. Police officers moved through the scene, securing the robbers and gathering statements. Liam, however, kept his distance, blending into the background. He watched as the hostages reunited with loved ones, their faces showing expressions of relief and gratitude. Liam felt a quiet satisfaction knowing he had done his part. He hadn't stepped into that bank with any plan to save lives, but when the moment came, his instincts, his training, and his duty to protect others had taken over. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. As he prepared to slip away, the young mother he had protected noticed him and made her way over, her baby now peacefully asleep in her arms. She looked at Liam with a mixture of awe and gratitude, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Liam nodded, his gaze warm yet humble. "You did great in there," he replied. "You kept calm for your child. That's all that matters." The young mother held his gaze, her expression serious. "No, you did more than that. You saved us. You risked your life to protect strangers." She hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. Can I at least know your name?" Liam considered her question for a moment, then offered a small, genuine smile. "Liam Walker," he replied simply. She nodded, repeating his name softly as if to commit it to memory. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're a hero." He gave her a slight nod, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. But to him, it wasn't about heroism. It was about doing what he knew in his heart was right. As the young mother returned to her family, a police sergeant approached Liam, extending a hand. "Mr. Walker," he began, his voice laced with respect, "we got the details from the hostages. We know what you did in there. I just wanted to say thank you." Liam shook the sergeant's hand, nodding. "Just did what needed to be done," he replied simply. The sergeant studied him, recognizing the unassuming courage in Liam's demeanor. "Not everyone would have done what you did. It takes a certain kind of person to step up like that." Liam looked away, his expression thoughtful. He hadn't sought out this kind of recognition, and he wasn't sure how to respond. To him, he had merely done his duty, a duty that had never truly left him, even after all these years. The sergeant seemed to sense Liam's humility and nodded, respecting his silence. "If you ever decide to come back to the field," he added quietly, "people like you are always needed." Liam managed a faint smile. "I appreciate that, but I think I'm right where I'm supposed to be." With a final nod to the sergeant, Liam turned and began walking away from the scene, blending into the gathering evening shadows. He didn't need medals, titles, or recognition. His peace came from knowing that he had been there when it mattered. As he walked, he felt a sense of closure that had eluded him for years. The weight of his past, the memories of lives lost, the regrets that had haunted him, seemed lighter now. He had saved lives today, and in doing so, he had found a way to honor the memory of those he couldn't save before. Liam's thoughts drifted to the faces of the people he had protected, the young mother, the elderly couple, the nervous teenager. Each one of them had placed their trust in him, even though they didn't know who he was. They had looked to him not as a stranger, but as a protector. He had always believed that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or public acknowledgement. True heroism was about quiet strength, about doing the right thing even when no one was watching. It was about making a difference, no matter how small. Today, he had been given a chance to fulfill that purpose, to remind himself of what he was capable of. And as he left the scene, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet but powerful resolve to keep living by those principles. As he reached the edge of the crowd, he heard a voice call out to him once more. It was the young mother, now standing with her family, watching him with a look of deep gratitude. "Thank you, Liam," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "We'll never forget what you did for us." Liam paused, giving her a slight nod and a faint, grateful smile. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Her words, her gratitude, were enough. He turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only the memory of a quiet hero who had emerged when he was needed most. As Liam walked away, the story served as a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who don't seek recognition or praise. They're the ones who step up when it matters most, leaving a lasting impact on the lives they touch. If this story of courage and selflessness resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. And remember, heroism isn't defined by fame or fortune. It's defined by the choices we make in the moments that count. If you enjoyed this story of quiet courage and true heroism, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really helps us reach more people with stories that matter. And if you want to hear more inspiring tales of everyday heroes and brave souls who step up when it matters most, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We share stories that show the strength in kindness, resilience, and bravery. Finally, let us know in the comments, what does being a hero mean to you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, heroism doesn't always make headlines, but it leaves an unforgettable mark.